And I think that there are also people who do care, but might be a little bit like, oh, have I missed the boat in asking the basic questions?
No, you're actually on the boat if you're asking the basic questions, right?
Good.
So with DEI, as that's the industry acronym, right? And B is attached there, which is now belonging. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Those are the common acronyms that you will see associated with it. The way I define it, diversity is about humanity, right? We have built a world where we have people fit into a one-size-fits-all, yet that goes against the true essence of who we are. No two people have a fingerprint that is the same, right? So why do we approach our work? Why do we design cars and cities as though they intend to fit a single person type? A lot of that has to do with the history, things like colonization, all sorts of segregation that's happened over time to specific groups that have led us to where we are today, right? So I think what is happening now is there's this awakening that's happening with people. And you saw a lot of it, particularly in COVID. I think COVID helped with a lot of things, right? It forced us to deal with our humanity and things that we just were not dealing with. Because for the first time, we were all locked up, you know, and we were
that's what we needed.
And we were forced to deal with things that we really had been neglecting. And one of those is how we actually treat one another, right? So gender equity has always been something that is on the radar, right? So if we're talking back to basics, right? Most people's understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion is around gender equity, right? The women empowerment movement, the suffrages, all of that. So people understand the history of gender equity. If I say to you gender equity, you get it. Right, you absolutely get it. You know, you're on team female, and it's around giving women that equal right, that equal voice, and women have been fighting for it. So if you take that and you extrapolate it to all the different demographic groupings that they are, so your LGBTIQ plus community, women of color, myself, people with disabilities, neurodivergent people, myself. So anybody who is in a position of difference, and you would be in that too. We all have layers of privilege, right? So, and I think why people are challenged by the diversity argument is that sometimes when people's privilege is challenged, everybody's kind of like, oh
my God, what do we do?
They're frightened. And so and then you get the other extreme where people are ashamed of their privilege and all of this. And that's not the intention either, right? So the intention is for all of us to build this a heightened awareness of the space that we occupy in this world. And that space comes with certain advantages and disadvantages, right? And the advantages that space comes with, how do I leverage that to lessen the disadvantages in other spaces, in the areas that I have influence over? Right? And if everybody took ownership of just that and stopped going on about ending world peace, you know, thinking about world peace, just, you know, stop trying to save the children in Africa. Like Africa will get its shit together or something. Very God's spirit. But that becomes the default, right? It's like, oh, I need to run off and save the kids in Africa. And I'm like, well, whatever. I never saw a World Vision truck in my life go. But that does not mean to say kids in Africa are not starving. Kids in Australia are starving, right?
Yes.
So it's like, but you don't have that much influence over that. Bill Gates does, because he's got a truckload of money and he's doing something with his truckload of money, whether you agree with it or not, different story, but that's a different budget. But what do I, Christine, with my privilege and my sphere of influence? So where are my advantages, right? My advantages is I've been well educated, right? I've had the privilege of traveling. You might find this a strange advantage, but in the colorism spectrum, you find that we all treat each other differently based on the color of our skin. We know that. It's a conversation we're really scared to have, particularly in the multicultural community, about how we treat each other differently based on the color of our skin, right? You know, it's not just a black and white thing. It's across the spectrum. If you talk to Indian communities, they're honest, they will tell you this exists. If you talk to Chinese communities, if you talk to Japanese communities. So there is this constant lighter is prettier, lighter is more intelligent, all of these things which are completely stupid. But
Yes.
but that is the way the world works. You have to acknowledge that. So how do you then if I acknowledge that, and if I acknowledge that in the space that I occupy, I have certain advantages, I also have certain challenges, but how do I use my advantages to overcome my challenge? So say I've come from a marginalized background where I've had to struggle, I've had to strive, I've built resilience, right? I understand people skills at all different demographics because I've had to learn to communicate in all different ways. I'm resourceful, right? So I know that when I'm starting a business, I need to, allocate and ration my resources. And I know that I need to be innovative because I don't have the trust fund behind me to start my business, right? So that gives me a cutting edge, right? How do I then leapfrog that into what it is that I want to be in, right? So at that essence, that's why diversity matters, right?
Yeah.
Because the way when I come into an organization that I look at a problem and the way you would look at a problem and the way somebody else would, it's completely different. So this is what organizations are missing, right? There is a reason why you should have diversity on your board. One CEO, I don't know if you watched the podcast Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett.
Yep.
He was interviewing, and I've completely forgotten the CEO he was interviewing, but she said something that stuck with me. She said, listen, while diversity is important, because if you do not have a diverse board, you and your team of happy yeses are going to walk each other to the end of a plank and fall off the edge of a cliff because you're so busy saying yes, yes to each other, you can't see that you've gotten to the end of the cliff and you're going over. So that's why it matters, because if you have me on your board and I have you on my board, I have so many different people with so many different experiences, so many different lenses, the way we process problems, the way we come up with solutions is different. And that will always result in a better product or services. But the problem why people don't want to go there is people don't want to share power, right? And if you think about it, the axis of power is still controlled by the same people who are of a homogenous demographic, regardless of where you go, right? And there is not that wanting to share power. So if I now start to acknowledge that I can add value, I no longer can now continue to justify why there are barriers to keeping you out.
Yes.
But if I ignore you and say you are irrelevant in terms of your diversity, I can continue holding on to my power.